Hello and thanks for watching. My name's Chris Larsen and I'm a resident at West Winds Mobile Lodge in the North Valley of Oceanside, California, which is located in District 2. Over a year ago, on May 1st, 2018, I sent a letter on behalf of the West Winds Oceanside HOA objecting to the 2018 rent increases, describing unfair business practices and violations to California's health and safety code relating to water and mold, as well as to the very dim nighttime lighting. On June 11, 2018, Angie Hanafin, housing administrator, wrote a response to my letter and sent it to me via email. Her letter acknowledges the letter I wrote, praises the West Winds community for forming an HOA, and then goes on to minimize and attempt to dispose of the claims of unfair business practices, essentially saying that the homeowners are the ones who signed the contracts. In Angie's response, she doesn't even acknowledge the health and safety code violations I described, and it became evident that she wanted to sweep it under the rug by only focusing on the unfair business practices. For some odd reason, Angie chose to minimize the significance of the fact that the owners of West Winds Mobile Lodge did not comply with Oceanside's Ordinance 16B and California Civil Code Section 798.17, which describes the conditions in which a mobile home park owner can offer leases that are exempt from rent control ordinances. Those ordinances aren't there just to fill space on paper. These are ordinances and civil codes that are enacted for the protection of the substantial investment manufactured homeowners have in their homes relative to the mobile home park owners, and more importantly, for the health and safety of manufactured homeowners and their families. On Thursday, April 2nd, 2019, just about a month ago, I attended the Manufactured Home Fair Practices Commission meeting at the City of Oceanside City Council chamber, where I objected to the Commission approving rent increases for West Winds Mobile Lodge for 2019. There was an apparently unusually high number of people who turned out to voice their concerns about violations of health and safety code from members of the community representing 4 mobile home parks. The Commission voted to approve all rent increases except for those mobile home parks that were indicated to have some violations, including West Winds Mobile Lodge. The increases were postponed pending action on those violations and review thereof. It was to be brought up again on the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Manufactured Home Fair Practices Commission. On Thursday, May 2nd, 2019, I attended that meeting, once again, at the City of Oceanside City Council chamber. This time I brought with me my tablet and I displayed a portion of a video that clearly shows inundation of street runoff, which occurs every year, several times a year. It showed pictures of the moldy walls inside a house that is at the center of all that inundation. The video, even though it was distributed to City Council members and to Angie and Margery, was not shared with members of the Manufactured Home Fair Practices Commission. Members report not having been made aware of the video. Despite the fact that I pointed out that this problem has caused serious health problems for my mom and myself, and that her homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover the damages caused because it was caused by park infrastructure problems, and that the owners of West Winds Mobile Lodge refused to even acknowledge her plight and request for them to provide insurance information or to pay for the damages. Margery Pierce and Angie Hanafin downplayed the flooding and the damage it caused, and you could hear it in the tone of her voice that she was annoyed that she was being forced to finally speak on it. Margery Pierce took advantage of the fact that I only had 3 minutes to describe my plight, as she took a multitude more time to confuse and disorient the Commission. She interpreted the video and the stormwater inundation for the Commission as a singular flooding event, noting the substantial rain received in 2019, knowing full well that I had no way of rebutting her during that meeting, because my 3 minutes were long gone, and speaking out of turn would have been uncivil, even though it would have been quite warranted. What's even worse, and in fact despicable, is the fact that the owners of West Winds Mobile Lodge are trying to evict my 62-year-old disabled mother from her home, citing the damaged skirting that the homeowner's insurance wouldn't pay to replace. And I made that perfectly clear before the commission, just before Margery began to grossly misrepresent the scope of the problem and the depth of her prior knowledge of the problem. As a matter of fact, I lost count of the number of times she said or I'm very concerned with the conduct of Margery Pierce and Angie Hanafin. In fact, I get the distinct impression that they hold the interests of mobile home park owners in a far higher regard than the interests of manufactured homeowners, for whom the commission was formed in the first place. During my presentation on the May 2nd, 2019 meeting, I also showed the checklist that is used by the city to determine if a mobile home park is compliant with California Health and Safety Code, making them eligible for their yearly rent increases. I pointed out that despite the preponderance of evidence presented to the council and to Angie and Margery, the checkbox that indicates that West Winds Mobile Lodge complies with the Health and Human Safety Code that's meant to prevent damage and unhealthy living conditions caused by standing water, it's erroneously checked. I questioned how it could be possible, considering the evidence and the extenuating circumstances that are going to lead to mine and my mom's homelessness, and her answer is truly quite astounding. After all of the speakers finished, the commissioners deliberated briefly and engaged Margery and Angie in a Q&A dialogue. One of the very first comments that was made was that
it looks as if nothing has happened since last month.
And that's absolutely correct. The question was then posed to Margery and Angie.
Has anything happened since last month?
To be quite frank, had I not known better, I'd have thought Margery Pierce was a lawyer speaking on behalf of and in support of the mobile home park owners, and in opposition to the enforcement of Oceanside's own ordinances and zoning laws against them. As a matter of fact, Margery's long-winded, twisted, and convoluted response gives the impression that the City of Oceanside Neighborhood Services Department and its ancillary or subsidiary operating units have nothing but the interests of mobile home park owners in mind. I'm sure you'll agree. Just listen to round 1 of Margery Pierce's nonsensical droning, a 4-minute, 25-second response to an otherwise straightforward, short and direct question of,
Has anything happened since last month?
Sorry, this is the problem that we're faced with, is that, sure, you saw a picture of a flood.
Margery, it wasn't just a picture of a flood. It was a video of a flood, and a video of evidence of subsurface erosion.
That obviously wasn't the condition of the park at the moment in time that the inspector went out there.
Margery, can you please point out something a little more obvious?
But we would like to point out to you is that a lot of that area was flooded. A lot of Oceanside was flooded with heavier rains than we've seen in years here. And so it wasn't unusual just to a mobile home park, because we had that happen all over the city. Down Coast Highway, there were surfers, so it was more massive than we normally have.
I'm not quite sure how surfers on Coast Highway have anything to do with massive flooding at West Winds Mobile Lodge, which is 4 miles inland.
Yes, things have happened. I know that at your last meeting, there was a complaint at El Camino 76 regarding the latch on the pool. And it is in working order. It functions like it should. I questioned also the code enforcement manager, Kirk, who's here, if there was any way for children to crawl underneath the fence, and the answer was no, because I couldn't really tell by the comments that were made if there was some other concern about children being able to get into the pool and not being able to lift the latch. So we did recheck both of those issues.
So let me get this straight, Margery. You scheduled the inspection on a day in which it would be impossible to determine whether or not the park has depressions that cause standing water, and you're satisfied with that? And further, you helped to get a door latch fixed.
But again, it's not within the purview of the commission to do the inspections, but to have them done by a professional code enforcement officer, and those were his opinions at the time that he did those inspections. And between now and the next meeting that you have, any type of code violation that a park owner or resident believes there's a violation can call code enforcement, and we will open a code enforcement case and do an inspection at that time of that item that they're reporting.
What about the letter that was written to Angie Hanafin on May 1st, 2018, an entire year prior to this year's rent increases? That letter clearly describes what are considered code violations, but aside from an acknowledgement of receipt of the letter, nothing at all was done to follow up. I was very specific in that letter, and it stated very clearly that there are massive cracks on the roadway, and that there's subsurface erosion that resulted in subsidence, which caused major damage to people's homes. Why was that letter all but completely ignored?
But for this particular inspection, it's that time, that moment in time the inspector is there. If later that day, something radical happens and a wall in the clubhouse caves in, we can't fail it for terms of this commission making a decision to do the increase. What we can do from a code enforcement is say, you need to get this clubhouse fixed in a reasonable period of time.
The letter sent to Angie Hanafin in May of 2018 and the complaints made by other homeowners and residents at the meeting on April 4, 2019 did not miraculously happen the day after the inspection was carried out in 2018 or 2019, and they certainly don't rise to a catastrophic, or radical as Margery puts it, act of nature like a wall falling down in the clubhouse. Any reasonable person knows that in a case like a catastrophic failure of a wall, that it is reasonable to expect that there will be some time required to fix the wall, and that it ought not rise to the denial of a rent increase, unless of course the failure of the wall is determined to have been caused by the failure of the park to maintain their premises. A collapse of a wall in the clubhouse certainly doesn't equate to the constant inundation of water onto people's lots, causing their houses to fall apart and for mold to take over.
And that period of time, depending on what the issue is, it could be that if it's a life-threatening type of an issue, then it may be that they would be given 24 to 48 hours to comply.
Whoa, wait a second. So if there's a life-threatening situation, the Code Enforcement Department has 24 to 48 hours to comply? Someone could end up dead within the 24 to 48 hours that Margery Pierce advises is the appropriate time for their department to comply. That means that you will get service, but you might just be dead by the time it happens.
It's not so life-threatening, and depending on how big and whether permits are required and stuff, they may be given 60 days. But whatever it would be reasonable, depending on what the issue is. So, some of these things that were brought up also, what we have to kind of cope with is that the state that we took over the inspection responsibility for limited their inspections. For example, I know that the issue of lot lines came up. The state, to the best of my knowledge, and for many years I know for sure, they weren't enforcing lot lines. The only thing that they cared about was that there was 6 feet between structures for fire safety purposes.
Wait a second. Margery, is it to the best of your knowledge? Or do you know for sure that they're not enforcing moth mites? 'Cause you've implied both. Which is it? Also, I find it very hard to believe that there were any manufactured homeowners in the 4 Oceanside mobile home parks subject to this discussion who made complaints about moth mites or fire protection easement, at least not in the open forum part of both meetings on the topic of rent increases this year. In any case, I fail to see how moth mites and fire protection easement disputes relates to the violations that were actually reported, both in 2018 and 2019. Most importantly, the moldy conditions that my mom and I have been forced to live in.
So the state laxed a lot on what they were inspecting, and the city is not able to impose greater, more restrictive requirements on the park owner just because we've taken over the inspection responsibility. Does that make sense?
Nope.
Does that make sense? Are you seriously asking that, Margery? Nothing you just said makes any sense at all, and particularly in the context of the problems that were actually reported, which brought us to this juncture. What does make sense, however, is that neither you, Angie, nor the city staff have made any apparent effort in investigating the reports of mold in standing water, and you have absolutely no intention of doing so, which is why there's no details as to who, what, where, when, and why with respect to the recommendations of the city staff and the report that they furnished for the May 2nd meeting.
So, I know that it's difficult for this commission because many of you have been on the commission a long time, others of you may be new but have an interest in this, and it's hard that you can't influence the maintenance very much other than this inspection and the management styles that we hear about not being particularly friendly and stuff. And I understand your frustration, but we have a very limited ordinance on what this commission can deal with.
Margery, it's clearly not management style that led to the owners of Westwinds Mobile Lodge failing to maintain the mobile home park, but rather negligence. I personally think it's absolutely appalling that you sat there with a relatively straight face and characterized the barbaric way the owners of Westwinds Mobile Lodge have run their park, and the heinous way they've treated my mom and myself. I don't know, after hearing this testimony, how anybody could have any faith in your ability and your trustworthiness. But it gets worse. You literally swerve around another straightforward question asked by Commissioner Gomez.
So, with regard to the inspection checklist, though, I believe that what we were to show speaks specifically to storm drains. And doesn't a rainstorm constitute what, a storm would be and the effective drainage systems?
Thank you for asking that, Commissioner Gomez. So the city doesn't, at this time, have an ordinance that requires private. So the way the mobile home parks are is they're structured is that most of the infrastructure, if not all of the infrastructure, is the responsibility of the park owner, including the sewer and the water. And last Saturday I attended, I'm kind of on tour of the parks right now, and I went to Cavalier, and some people there brought up the issue of their sewage backing up into their individual mobile homes, and that they felt it was because of a lack of upkeep of the sewer system there. And so on Monday I called our utility director, and she and her staff started working. Well, she said that they thought it was a good idea for the city to look in adopting an ordinance that would require private property owners of their systems to maintain their systems. And then a gentleman from Rancho San Luis Rey contacted us via email and indicated that when their park has a water problem, what he said is that the individual valves don't work, so the result is the water is turned off for all 422 spaces there. And so again, I notified the city's utility director, and she said we're on the same page, meaning that her staff will start working on and working with the attorney's office on potentially having the council adopt an ordinance that would hopefully eradicate this problem.
So, to recap, Commissioner Gomez asked a very simple, straightforward question about storm runoff. Margery then spent 2 minutes and 20 seconds evading Commissioner Gomez's question with more nonsensical droning, starting out with something about how the city has no ordinance that requires private property owners to maintain their infrastructure. Yes, mobile home park owners are considered owners of private property, as she states, but they also operate a mobile home park in Oceanside, and those operations are subject to Oceanside's Ordinance 16B in conjunction with California's Mobile Home Residency Law and California Health and Safety Code. There is, as a matter of fact, ordinance that requires the mobile home park owners, whom Margery characterizes as mere private property owners, to maintain their infrastructure, and the yearly inspections and subsequent rent increases is a component. Margery is attempting to completely distract attention from the stormwater that Commissioner Gomez asked about, and instead went on and on and on about sewage systems and water delivery systems at San Luis Rey, where water service is shut off to 422 residents whenever repair to the water delivery system is undertaken. Margery then went on to say that the city staff, in conjunction with the utilities director, are going to work on a draft ordinance to hopefully eradicate the problem, referring only to the sewage and the water delivery system problems. The sewage problems that she brought up and the water delivery system problems have absolutely nothing at all to do with the storm drainage question that Commissioner Gomez brought up. Why would Margery Pierce go to such great lengths to distort the facts and evidence and to confuse the commission? Another question was brought up by another commissioner, asking about the cracks in the street that were apparent in the video that I had just shown.
It was mentioned before by the streets, the cracks in the streets and that kind of thing. Anyone taking a look at that?
By now, Margery is exhausted from her efforts to evade the matter of the storm water drainage, and so she taps out and a gentleman named Kurt takes over for her to carry the baton.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Kurt Klein. I'm the Code Enforcement Manager, and I supervise the Code Enforcement Officers who complete these inspections. As far as the cracks in the asphalt that we observed tonight on the display, my question would be is if there is a significant lift or a trip hazard.
It was pretty clear in the pictures.
Okay.
Excuse me, but when someone's talking to the commission, could you just not make comments and allow the person to finish? Thank you.
I can conduct a further inspection to determine if that's something that would be a violation. From the photos, it was inconclusive to me if it is a significant lift or if it's just a level crack in the asphalt. We can make that determination by an on-site inspection.
This is one of the photos that was shown during my presentation, the photo that Kurt refers to as inconclusive. The image looks as if it were taken in a third world country or something. Other commissioners were then given an opportunity to ask Kurt questions, and so Commissioner Gomez followed up with his original question to Margery Pierce concerning the stormwater runoff.
So my question to Ms. Pierce was more about storm drainage, not about sewage drainage. Is there something I'm failing to understand here? Because it seemed like her answer spoke more to sewage than to storm drainage.
I believe she was discussing the entire infrastructure system and that there should be a follow-up or a maintenance program with that infrastructure.
Yeah, that's exactly what Margery Pierce talked about, despite Commissioner Gomez having specifically asked about stormwater runoff and drainage.
As far as the rainfall stormwater systems, we have to remember that this is an inspection completed at one point in time. Unless we're there, and also this February we did receive an inordinate amount of rain for the season, more rain than we've received in the past couple of years.
Now when I said that Kurt took the baton from Margery, I meant it, literally. He makes the same point that Margery made, that his inspection took place on a dry day, and that it was one point in time. I'm sure by now everybody is privy to that fact. Without completing his thought, he moves right to the inordinate amount of rain we received in 2019, again taking exactly what Margery Pierce said and regurgitating it. Both Kurt and Margery have now represented that the flooding that was shown in my video was anomalous and attributable to this year's significant rainfall, giving the impression that this was a transient occurrence. At this point, I had already spoken and was not allowed to speak any more to correct the misrepresentation that Margery Pierce and Kurt resorted to. Unlike Margery and Kurt, I didn't have the luxury of offering the Commission a long protracted explanation, though I would have liked to have had the opportunity. Because I only had 3 minutes to give my presentation, I used what I thought was the most illustrative video and images. Had I had just another minute, I could easily have gone over a timeline of the flooding. I would have added the following sequence to demonstrate the chronic nature of this inundation of stormwater runoff. The inundation of stormwater runoff and the standing water left behind has happened time and time again. The photos I'm about to show aren't time-stamped, however, they were all uploaded to Google Photos at the time they were taken. And that's where I'm able to ascertain the dates and times, as I'll demonstrate for each photo. Though the flooding has happened each year since 2001 when my mom bought her home, we had no way of knowing that we should be documenting it until after a few years when it became apparent that there was a destructive pattern. The first set of images here was taken on October 20th, 2004. These photos were taken on January 9th, 2005, just a few months later. As you can see, the flooding of the driveway is not an isolated case as Margery and Kurt would have you believe. Here you can clearly see how deep the water is. A few months later, on February 21st, 2005, I captured these images. Now, for the sake of saving time, let's fast forward a decade. On January 6, 2016, as you can tell from these images, nothing has changed, and by now you should be able to recognize the clear and consistent pattern of stormwater inundation in these images. A year later, on January 20th, 2017, another flooding event, with quite a few in between. In any case, Kurt goes on to try and further convince the Commission that this was a transient event.
We have had flooding on several public streets that are well equipped with storm drain systems. So it's not, as she said, it's not exclusive to just the park. For us to determine if there's a storm drain problem, we would have to observe it under those circumstances, and that's something that we in Southern California, we don't get a lot of rain or a lot of heavy rain, it's difficult to do. If we're aware of a problem and we can determine that on a dry day or a day that we can observe it otherwise, we can definitely require those corrections, but to catch it during that extreme circumstance is going to be difficult to do, but not impossible. It's just a matter of that time. But we do these inspections once a year to catch it on, I think it was February 14th, we got the most rain and had flooding in other parts of the city. If we were to catch it on that day, we'd be able to observe those conditions under the circumstances, but otherwise it is difficult to determine in this inspection.
I don't know what kind of education background Kurt has, or what kind of experience he has. I'm not at all experienced with civil engineering or hydrology, but I was able to, using common sense and basic logical deduction, to devise an experiment to demonstrate how water pools up in the curb in front of my mom's house, as you'll see in the video. This leads to the question, how is it that a novice such as myself is able to determine under circumstances that a supposed professional code enforcement officer claims to be, and I quote, extremely difficult, if not impossible to do, that there's places in the park where water pools up? Logical deduction indicates that, based on the video evidence I provided, that there's a very serious problem with standing water. Indeed, it's my inclination to believe that a professional code enforcement officer or inspector ought not be able to certify health and safety code compliance when they, as they admit, cannot possibly have made the determination for whatever reason, whether it be natural, like in this case, with the lack of rain, or otherwise. As a matter of fact, I believe that by checking the box that indicates that West Wind's Mobile Lodge complies with Title 25, which states that there shall be no depression in which excessive amounts of surface water accumulate so as to create an unreasonable risk to health and safety, that it was in fact a bold-faced lie. If someone represents something to be true, but does not first verify it to be true, that makes him or her a liar, or ignorant at best. I'd like to further point out that the passage specifically mentions surface water, And I'd like to remind you that you just heard Margery Pierce obliterate this passage with a long-winded, nonsensical speech about sewage and possible new ordinance, all in an effort to obfuscate the facts and skew the Commission's vote. If a person can sit there in front of the Commission with a straight face while intentionally feeding them with such an immense piece of confusion pie, it's a sign that perhaps they're getting a bit too comfortable. Margery Pierce has been in her current role for quite some time now, and right now, more than ever before, it's apparent that she's become complacent. Enough so that she felt comfortable enough to do what she did in a public proceeding that's recorded. I never in a million years thought I'd have to create a video like this, but apparently corruption is no stranger to even the most trivial of public employees. I would like to officially request email records, calendar records, handwritten notes, and all other correspondences between Margery Pierce, Angie Hanafin, and anybody else in their office, and anybody else relating to mobile home rent control and violations of these ordinances and health and safety code. I'm kind of thinking we'll probably find evidence of a pretty cozy relationship between mobile home park owners in Oceanside and Margery Pierce and Angie Hanafin.